This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter.
At Pepe Sayer, we focus on quality. So if someone comes into your restaurant and they see you're using Pepe Sayer, they know immediately that that is a quality product you've got in front of you on the table. And that comes from a decade of just doing quality butter day after day.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
We call it grass to grass. We're a circular business rather than just grass to glass, and so we do control everything from the blades of grass on the ground to the cow, through the way we process, and through distribution to the consumer. So that there's that connection with our customers and our consumers.
This is The Producers. I'm Dani Valent. Simon Schulz runs Schulz Organic Dairy, a family operation with 50 years of history across 3 generations. Based in pretty Timboon behind the Great Ocean Road west of Melbourne, Simon produces organic milk from a single herd of Friesian and Jersey cows. The Schulz range also includes yoghurt, cream and quark, with a focus on producing and supplying sustainably. Milk in glass bottles isn't just cosy nostalgia, it's present-day reality.
So my name's Simon Schulz. I'm the 3rd generation dairy farmer from southwest Timboon, and my business is Schulz Organic Dairy, and we not only farm dairy cows, but we also process that beautiful milk into cream, yoghurt, milk and cheese and butter, and distribute that to cafes and retailers throughout Melbourne and Victoria. So the Schulz story starts with my grandfather Herman, who immigrated from Germany after the World War. I think he was about 10 or 12 during the Second World War. Migrated out to Victoria in the very early 50s, eventually settled in Timboon in 1972 after working his way around the district for a number of years. Found this beautiful parcel of land in Timboon, Victoria, where he felt that the climate was conducive to dairy cattle. So he and my grandmother, Marla, started up organic farming in that very beginning. And actually they were forced. They begged, borrowed and stole from everyone they could to purchase the land. And within the very first 12 months, the dairy industry collapsed back in 1972, and they were forced to farm without the convention of the day, which was chemical farming, high amounts of nitrogen and so forth. So they were forced to go to biodynamic because of a collapse in the milk price at the time, and they were, dead up to the hilt, so to speak. And so they pioneered that back then, before organics was really a thing, and biodynamics was really just coming to the fore in Europe, and they farmed biodynamically. If we fast forward to 1984, my grandfather and my grandmother were still farming organically or biodynamically then, and they weren't getting the value for their milk at the time. And so they decided that the best way to see value in what they were doing and the high quality milk they were producing was to value add. And so they started making some French style cheeses on the back doorstep or the back veranda of the house. They had a sunken concrete tank in which they matured some cheeses, buried under earth, and really started one of the first reintroduction of farmhouse cheese production here in Australia. And that was back in 1984. They built a new factory within 12 months, and their business, which was Timboon Farmhouse Cheese, was born and grew and was flying out in Qantas at its peak, sold into Coles and Woolworths at its peak as well. And fast forward again, they about 20 years to 2000, the family decided that while they were farming as well, and then the value adding, the pressures of business was too much for them, and they decided to sell the original manufacturing part of the business, the cheese making, and they sold it to King Island Dairy back in 2000. At that time, I myself was quite young. I was still at school, and so I was never given the opportunity and the option to continue on that family legacy of cheese making and value adding. Even though I had worked and did work in my early adult years in the sold cheese business, it wasn't until 2006 where I had ventured back to Melbourne and had ventured into some small business development and had been working in a few other cheese factories and dairy factories here in Melbourne to get some experience. I was invited back to the family farm, and my grandfather invited me back along with my father, who at the time had been running the dairy farm for quite some years, probably since near 84. He'd been running the farm on behalf of my father and himself. I was invited back, and with a small amount of investment from both those in me, I guess, Schulz Organic Dairy was born, and that was the idea was born in 2005, and we converted an old cheese factory, an old dairy, a tiny little old dairy, into a cheese factory because at the time King Island was still producing cheese out of the original factory, and Schulz Organic Dairy was born. So they invested in me. They gave me the funds to start up something fresh and something new. And in those early years, we focused on yoghurt predominantly and milk, which was not conflicting with the original family history in cheese making. So that's the very beginning of the story, I guess, in terms of our journey to now. And then obviously the last 15, 16 years have been incredibly challenging, but also enlightening in terms of what we've achieved over the last 15 years now as well.
The rhythms of life in a dairy farming family are dictated by the milking needs of the cows. What was it like for Simon to grow up on the family farm?
My father was a dairy farmer for the family, and our exposure to really the cheese making side of the business was relatively light on. And so my parents would talk about dairy farming predominantly. The conversation was always about the challenges of dairy farming and the ins and outs. I vastly recall rarely going on holidays with the family because dairy farming is a 7-day a week, 365 days a year job where you're milking at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and you're not finishing until 6 o'clock at night. And then there's other challenges like checking cows late at night, especially if they're in the late stages of their pregnancy. So my exposure as a kid was really seeing my father and my mother go through those challenges of being a dairy farmer, and then being able to grow up on 1,000 acres of beautiful country land with bush to play in, kangaroos, motorbikes, mud, all the things that young kids love, and my children love as well in exploring the great outdoors that we were so blessed to actually have grown up in. So my childhood was really all about playing outside, not so much taking too much knowledge and understanding of what my parents and the struggles they were going through. Certainly as young kids, probably 11, 12, we would get the dairy cows in. In the early days, we probably had to walk, and then we were on the little 3-wheeler motorcycle pottering around, getting cow rides by my father and my mum on the Jersey cows, all the stragglers, the ones what we call the friendly cows that always seem to linger at the very back of the line, getting cow rides. That I remember certainly some great memories of that when I was younger. And then probably the mid-teens, I was then starting to milk cows with the farm hands at the time, starting to learn that trade, and that was great as a young kid, working with some non-family members, I suppose, to sort of open us up to that social etiquette of working with older people. They probably weren't all that much older than myself. My 4 or 5 years, but. That certainly developed my personality working with them, and then just the fun in the summer where you'd squirt each other with hoses and the conversations you'd have walking up and down the pit lane while milking cows. It was a lot of fun.
With his family's identity bound up in dairy, Simon had an urge to leave the farm and do his own thing. But somehow he kept gravitating to dairy-related jobs And slowly but surely, the industry reeled him back in.
In those early years, when I first left school, I did work in the factory for 12 months. But I guess I was at that stage in life where I just really needed to find out who I was. So I left the farm, moved to Melbourne, found a nothing sort of job in that first 12 months, and that was really just about fleeing the coop, getting out and exploring, trying to find out who I am and what I was, and certainly made some mistakes in those early years, and I don't think I even spoke to my father and my parents really for 6 months, probably just a text message saying, yeah, I'm all okay, but it was probably a while until I saw them, and I didn't really have any major interest to come back to the farm. I just found myself in those 3 years in Melbourne just falling into jobs that happened to be in the dairy industry because that's what I kind of knew. I guess the catalyst for me having interest in the dairy industry was really I was involved in a business in Dandenong, another cheese business that did predominantly yogurts, but they did some cheeses as well. I was given some charge over a production line making some cottage cheese, but I was also given some influence in some R&D work, and so my grandfather had happened to have some ownership in this business, and so I was blessed enough to have a bit of freedom there, and so he and I were working on some really innovative low-fat or skim milk-based camemberts, and they were really flavoursome. They were based off quark, but really flavoursome, grew beautiful white mould, lasted forever, and made out of low-fat milk, and that was really the turning point for me. Developing something, being creative, and then unfortunately the company that we were working for wasn't really interested in some of the developments we did. They were in some, but in most of them they weren't. And my grandfather said, "Well, Simon, we've got this old factory. Why don't you come back and start up the family business?" And at that point in time, I was a bit disheartened about doing all this work into R&D for this company, and not seeing any value in that. So and probably not feeling valued as well. And so the invitation was there. The negotiations about my grandfather investing in me, I suppose, and giving me a bit of money to rebuild a factory, a bit like he did, I suppose. We were 100% indebted to him and my father, and that's where I came back, and I probably still was sort of stumbling around those first couple of years, just doing the work, developing, and not really having the passion. But it was after a couple of years of doing farmers markets and starting to see some success and developing some relationships with people like Will Studd in the cheese world, and his daughter Fleur Studd, and other chefs as well, Shannon Bennett and Dan Hunter, for example. Developing those relationships really got me inspired and found that passion after a couple of years. So it was probably 2008, 2007, 2008 until I really knew that being in the dairy industry and staying on the family farm was truly really what I believed in, what I loved, and then since then, looking beyond the family and looking beyond just Schulz and seeing what it led me down the path of really what is my impact and what's my company's impact on the environment in which I live in, and the environment, the packaging, the waste, but also the community that my business and I worked in and thrived in. And so that's where in the last 5 years, 6 years, we've really developed as a business to really focus on more than just what Schulz provides in terms of dairy. It's really about how we engage with our community, local community, the Melbourne community, the food community, how we engage with our environment, both on the farm. We've been certified organic for 50 years, but what else can we do to contribute or to improve our environment? And that's where our milk and glass, our packaging developments on milk and glass and this circular economy base of the glass and now our kegs, that's really where my passions have lied. in trying to improve our effect on the environment and on our community.
Milk is a basic grocery staple, often considered little more than white stuff in a bottle to pour over cornflakes. Simon explains how he was coaxed into selling milk as a gourmet product.
The very first year was our yoghurt and quark. We did a German-style fresh cheese. We weren't wanting to step on the toes of my grandfather's original business, which was a lot of French-style cheeses. And so we really focused on other value adds like the yogurts and the quark and cream. And then after about 6 months, 8 months, I had a few customers say, your products are brilliant, but we'd love you to do boutique milk. And I saw a space at that point in time that no one was doing boutique milk. It was only the major players. It was only, the multinationals really producing this product. And I thought, well, consumers are asking me for this product. I'm going to basically do what they ask. And so that's where the milk was born. And then, an encouragement through Will Studd and his daughter Fleur, taking on our brand in the very early days when they opened up, really sort of allowed us to get some traction with the cafe market as well as consumers. So it wasn't initially what we first went into, but we were very adaptive to what we felt the consumers wanted.
When milk is allowed to express itself, it naturally tells the story of seasons changing. What differences can consumers expect when milk is produced naturally?
Our milk particularly is very seasonal. We don't standardise any of our milk, and so as the cow gives it is what our consumers get in the bottle. So we don't take fat off the top. We don't take out flavours like the bigger multinationals. We don't put in flavours or proteins like the bigger multinationals. We don't do permeates. So the consumer really does get to see and taste the seasons of the year. What we're seeing right now in spring is as the sun starts to come out more, we'll start seeing higher sugars in the milk. Therefore, there should be slightly sweeter flavours this time of year. As we go into summer, depending on what the cows are eating, farmers do a lot of what they call summer crops. So that could be things like turnips, rapes, brassicas, sorghums, that sort of thing. That can bring in other flavours through too as well. Then as we move into autumn and sort of late summer, early autumn, where the grass that they're eating is no longer fresh, it's often not dead but browning, so it's not as green as it usually is in spring. I suppose the way I describe the milk, it comes across a little bit more barny. It's a little bit more fibrous, you would say. In terms of coffee, this time of year is usually the best time for frothing. Frothing of a milk in a coffee is very specific to proteins and a particular type of protein to create the micro foaming that you get in your coffee. So foaming this time of year is usually a lot better than in other times of the year, even though overall the protein content goes down this time of year. Then in winter, there's a lot more silage fed, which is fermented grass, so that does change the flavours subtly as well. But more and more, as we learn what the cows are doing, what they're eating, and so forth, we try and keep a relatively consistent diet for them, despite the fact that the grass grows this time of year and it doesn't grow in summer. The flavours are more consistent than they were 15 years ago when I first started, it also and flavours also determined by what stage of lactation the cows are in. We're calving year round now, so that's not normally an issue. It's quite consistent for us now.
An encounter with sustainability pioneer Joost Bakker was transformative, spurring Simon to offer milk in returnable glass bottles.
A relationship that I had developed, I suppose, with Joost Bakker from Silo or from the greenhouse, and he coming to me probably late 2000s, 2009, maybe 2010, and asked me to put milk into a stainless keg for him. And really delivering to his store, myself, and just discussions with him and his team about what he was trying to do and the effects of plastics and all this waste that he was trying to save from the environment, from landfill, really inspired me, and that made me. We invested in the doing milk into kegs, and also actually invested in putting milk into glass back in those very early years. I guess the problem I found was that I was very, very busy, and I never really fully realised that dream of putting milk into glass until the War on Waste, the first season, which Yoast was also a part of, and that really convicted me of, well, Simon, you've got these glass bottles here. You've been dreaming of this innovation going back to glass for many years with Yoast and with others. Now it's time to actually do something about it. And so that within a few months after that, 3 months, I think we launched our milk and glass through the farmers markets, and to great success. The consumers really enjoyed the fact that we were not. It's not a linear system. We were returning the glass bottles, washing them, and then refilling them and then putting them back out there. So these glass bottles that were designed for throwaway or for recycling were being reused time and time again. So we took that success, that small little success at the farmers markets, to go, well now we want to develop a bottle that's going to last the test of time. And so we crowdfunded for that and had huge success at that point in time. We raised over $100,000 to invest in new washing machinery and glass bottle design development and so forth that would lead us through the next few years. So we crowdfunded for these glass bottles and the development of. I took a trip to the US where glass bottle manufacturing and dairy companies were filling and having this circular economy with their glass bottles in the USA. Got some lessons and learnt some things there, and brought it back and applied it to us. And so I think we're 3 or 4 years in now to our glass bottles. We've saved over 25 tonne of glass of potential landfill or waste going to landfill or waste plastic, and seen huge success in that. And we're looking forward to the next development for us to be able to release that more to more customers and more consumers, so that because it has been incredibly successful today.
Glass bottles are great, but what about going even further? Simon explains the other way milk on tap system for food service and retail too.
The other way keg was really the beginning of a more commercialised version of what I had originally started with Yoast back 10 years ago. Again, he inspired me to. He asked the question, Simon, I want you to put milk into kegs, and I did that for him. It was not necessarily commercially viable for us back then, but we had been working on these kegs for a number of years. We have a variety of different versions. A couple of the other way must be version 3 or 4. Marginal success at each development, but always improvement. And so with coronavirus, we had just before the pandemic hit, we had planned to do some major R&D and really push the kegs into food service particularly, and but also retail. The pandemic hit, and as everyone did, everyone contracted then, and we didn't want to risk developing something that we weren't quite sure was going to work in the market, especially when food service and cafes were really under the pressure, and many closing down. So we shelved it for a while, and then earlier this year, one of my customers, Leon from Leaf, who's been a huge supporter of Schulz for the 16 years that we've been here, he made the connection. He said, Simon, I know you've been looking at kegs for a while. Here is a company that's just started launching the other way. And so he connected us. We reached out, and I was just about to go on my first holiday for 6 years, or first decent holiday for 6 years. And basically we had a meeting with Ed from the other way, and I said, Ed, we're going to do it. you guys organise it with my staff while I'm away, and then we'll launch as soon as I get back. And essentially that's what it is. I'm very committed to it, to the idea of reducing collectively our impact on landfill, and particularly on plastic use. And the other way was a great solution that had solved some of the problems that I had with my developments in previous generations. And so it's an early partnership with the other way. It's only been going 3 months at this point in time, but we're seeing some good successes there, and they're seeing an appetite from consumers to reduce their impact on the environment. And we just need we need all businesses to do small steps to improve. I'm of a vision that Schulz is 50 years. This year, 50 years of organic farming. Schulz Organic Dairy is 16 years since it started with just me starting back in a small factory. But our vision is going to 100 years, another 50 years from now, and to think and try and plan for things of small steps that we can gradually make over the next 50 years to hopefully be carbon positive and have no impact on landfill and so forth. I mean these are big crystal ball dreams and ideals, but if we don't start now and if we don't start taking small steps, then we will never achieve it.
Schulz products are loved for their flavour, quality and traceability, but that's just the beginning of the reasons people seek them out.
In business, you often talk about a lot of unique selling points, and our list is incredibly long and sometimes difficult to remember every single point. I think our consumers really, we're certified organic, so that is clearly a point of difference to our consumers. But there are more organic dairies coming, which is great to see people embracing the organic food movement. I think people will enjoy our transparency and our connectiveness. We are we call it grass to grass. We're a circular business rather than just grass to glass, and so we do control everything from the blades of grass on the ground to the cow, through the way we process, and through distribution to the consumer. So that there's that connection with our customers and our consumers that I think is a great attribute to our business. And it's not common, well, it's very rare in Australia to have a business that is that vertically integrated and goes from the cow all the way to the consumer. We actually even own our own little cafe on farm, so we really do understand cafes and retailers from our own point of view. We deal with all the challenges that they do on a smaller scale, but many of the challenges that they do as well. So we can really relate to people all along the supply chain, and I think our consumers really embrace that. And probably the biggest thing that makes us stand out is our commitment to our waste management and what we're doing to minimise the waste that we have on the farm, which we've done for 50 years. We're certified organic. We don't use synthetic fertilisers, insecticides, pesticides. We're not pouring on chemicals or nitrogen that's petroleum based. But now we're also really focused on creating that circular economy with our milk and glass and our kegs. And if the consumers demand it, we will. It'd be great to see in 50 years' time that we're not processing any plastic at all. It's all in glass, or it's all in the kegs. So, at the end of the day, we're guided by what the consumer demands and wants, and those three things are those three things being organic, being vertically integrated, and being committed to being carbon positive and in the impact on our environment and community are the three key things that make Schulz different.
Australian consumers love dairy, but that doesn't mean the industry is thriving. Simon outlines the huge challenges that have beset the industry and the serious impacts on mental health and the viability of farming and milking.
The dairy industry in Australia is really struggling. It has for a number of years. Probably since 2000, it's really been declining. Deregulation came in, which really gave the power into the into the manufacturers, and particularly the multinationals, the big producers, Fonterra, Murray Goulburn when it was existing, and so forth. And the last number of years since 2016, when the dairy industry had their milk price collapse, that really damaged the dairy industry internally. Many dairy farmers, there was so many that committed suicide in that period of time. Mental health has been terrible for dairy farmers for a long time. Dairy farmers when they retire, they go into beef farming and sheep farming. Dairy farmers never always a farmer, but we retire to a less intensive form of farming, I suppose you would say. So it's a very tough gig, and when you're getting hit around a lot by milk price and getting undervalued and devalued, it takes a terrible toll on your finances, your family life, and we can see that in the dairy industry just simply by the number of farmers that are getting really, really old. The average age of agricultural and particularly dairy is quite old, and there's a huge exodus in dairy at the moment, which is why everyone's seeing such high prices on the retail shelf as well as the farm gate. But farmers are still leaving despite the high prices because the stress, the abuse they've received in the past from processors, but also seeing their product devalued on the shelf by Coles and Woolworths, and seeing milk sold cheaper than water, and yet it's so much more intensive. So I think dairy farmers particularly, feel very undervalued. We've sat outside of that, thankfully. My philosophy is that my farm doesn't need to keep growing and keep getting bigger just to survive, whereas that's been the agricultural MO for many, many years, that the only way to survive is get bigger and get into more debt, and we've bucked that trend by value adding. And so I do fear for my fellow farmers. It's all tough, and it's tough for us too. The last 3 years have been tough for everyone, and I think everyone can relate to that. I do fear for the industry, and I think prices are going to get more expensive. I think more farmers are going to keep exiting the industry. Land prices are very high in agriculture at the moment, so older farmers and younger farmers are struggling to get into the industry, and older farmers are selling up and retiring. So it's going to be tough.
Simon is passionate about his role as custodian of Schulz Organic Dairy. What does he love about what he does?
I love the fact that my job is I can never predict what I'm going to do each day. I have no routine, because apart from first thing getting coffee in the morning is the quintessential part of my job. I love the fact that my day is very varied. I can go through and have numerous conversations with my customers and consumers. I really enjoyed that and thrived that when I was younger, and delivering direct to customers, where I'd have these great chats with people. But I also love being out in the country and being isolated and by myself on the farm, and not being distracted by staff and by customers, and mowing grass for silage season, or doing various work in the tractor. When it's sunny outside, it's fantastic being on the farm. When it's pouring rain outside, I'm very happy to be in an office, or being in Melbourne and talking to customers. It's generally I really enjoy what I do. It's just because it's the variety I get.
Simon Schulz is a modern producer with a meaningful family legacy. He's focused on the health of the dairy industry and the impact he can have on the supply chain and his customers, especially by putting carbon-positive operations at the heart of his ambitions. Every creamy caffe latte, every dollop of yoghurt on a bowl of muesli is a vote of confidence in Simon Schulz's small batch, organic, grass-to-grass pathway. This is The Producers, a Deep in the Weeds production. I'm Dani Valent. Stay tuned as we talk to some of Australia's best farmers, makers and growers. Follow us on Instagram at Producers Podcast, or contact us via deepintheweeds.com.au.